Order. Catherine West to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a real pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I'm very grateful to the Backbench Committee for granting this debate. And I'd first of all like to pay tribute to Baroness Lola Young in the House of Lords, and she is, of course, originating from Hornsey and is a great champion for this particular policy area in the Houses of Parliament. For centuries, of course, the UK was known as a world leader in garment and textiles production, and we do retain this global reputation based on quality and craftsmanship. Every region has its specialty, from Nottinghamshire shoes to Scottish tweed and Yorkshire wool. And from Savile Row to Brick Lane, our capital city is synonymous with fashion throughout the decades. The sector indirectly supports 200,000 jobs in London. People come from all over the world to shop here, and many come to study. 55 UK universities offer fashion and textiles courses, and nothing says more about our place in global culture. In an increasingly uncertain world, our reputation and our expertise is everything, and UK soft power opens many doors. I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, what qualifies an MP to talk about fashion? Well, many years ago, 1985 to be precise, my sister, who is a wonderful seamstress, returned to Australia after a visit to the UK, and with her she brought her most prized Liberty fabric. She made it into a skirt for me, and that's what I'm wearing today. Slow, ethical fashion is timeless, and had I known in advance, I would have encouraged the Minister to have worn his handmade tartan kilt, which we would have loved to have seen on him. But next time, I'm sure we will be able to do that, Minister. Last month, I sponsored a backbench debate on food inflation and the cost of living. Some might think that a debate about onshoring fashion is a completely different topic, but both go to the heart of who I am as a Labour MP, what I came into politics to do, and what kind of country we need to be. We need an inclusive economy, one that works for everyone, where work pays, and whether you're a young person starting out or a parent returning to work, you have access to skilled jobs, training, and a bright future for you and your family. And in politics, we should do everything to start with these most basic of values. And how do we put our values into action? We know that the rapid rise of fast fashion encouraged outsourcing and offshoring, but growing awareness of environmental and social issues in fashion has sparked a revival in the UK industry. Today, the government has a chance to support slow, ethical fashion and invest in homegrown talent and skills. Fashion and textiles manufacturing in Britain could be a key driver of economic growth. The Procurement Act 2023 enables public bodies to prioritise ethical sourcing and local manufacturing. There's huge potential here for the UK fashion and textiles industry. Onshoring in the fashion and textiles industry could unlock $3.1 billion in GDP, 64,000 new jobs, and $1.2 billion in tax receipts. And it's vitally important when we know that the UK's services trade has exceeded expectations this quarter, but that our government goods trade still has some way to catch up. I'll be asking the Minister to support the industry, encourage public procurement of local suppliers, provide support to small firms for capital expenditure and research and development, and work with the industry to promote training and apprenticeships. I was so pleased that at last November's budget, the Chancellor announced funding to make training for under-25s apprenticeships completely free for small and medium-sized enterprises. There was also an increase in the minimum wage for 18 to 20-year-olds from April 2026 to over £10 an hour for the first time. We need to give young people the support and opportunities which they deserve. The budget also included new measures to stop overseas online firms from undercutting UK bricks and mortar businesses by ensuring that customs duty applies to parcels of any value, and I look forward to seeing the impact of those measures. But before I say more how the government can help, let me address the industry, and particularly those brands which are manufacturing offshore. I know that Brexit has not helped the UK industry. It was a game changer, and many firms have had to reassess their whole business model, right down to overnight delivery of buttons and zips, right up to delivery in big impacts on workforce and many teachers in the world of fashion. There are costs to producing in the UK, of course, but what about the benefits? More flexibility and agility from local suppliers, faster turnaround times that global competitors can't match due to distance, more transparency, customers know exactly where their clothes are made, and made in the UK is a point of pride for us all. Ethical manufacturing is an asset to a brand, particularly with the government's new flagship Employment Rights Act. You can assure your customers of world-leading workers' rights and ethical employment standards. Every garment you produce can not only say made in the UK, but made in the UK under fair conditions. Contributing to the circular economy. There's a huge potential for recycling, used garment collection and regenerated fabric, which could set the UK apart as the global capital of truly sustainable fashion. And of course, by manufacturing in the UK, we're also a vital part of our towns and cities. And I know there are other members in this debate who will talk about the opportunity for the regions to create jobs directly and indirectly, where money earned stays in local communities, helping every single family to thrive. So how can the government help? Firstly, procurement. As I've said, the Procurement Act 2023 enables public bodies to prioritise ethical sourcing and local manufacturing. The government's industrial strategy talks about driving innovation and increasing access to talent. The National Procurement Policy Statement emphasised taking into account priorities in local and regional economic growth plans, so public bodies can procure in a way which supports the economic needs of the communities they serve, rather than having pounds, shillings and pence as the sole consideration. One example is uniforms, and we know there are some best practice examples of school uniforms, but how about uniforms which are used in the prison service or even in the military, which is one area where we know that there is going to be growth in public expenditure. Britain is a global leader in camouflage fabric production, yet the majority of military uniforms are manufactured overseas. The House of Commons Library have been very helpful, and they have given me information on contract sizes and which firms are procured, but the supply chains are complex and a bit opaque. And I'm not sure whether the Minister has expertise in this area, but I'm sure that if he doesn't, he can write to me later, or perhaps I can try with the MOD again. Ministerial questions have revealed that exact details of the quantities and location of where the armed forces dress and combat uniforms are produced are not held centrally. An inquiry from 2013, that is now a long time ago, revealed just 6% of UK military uniforms were made in the UK. Madam Deputy Speaker, we see quite a lot of flag waving in politics at the moment, but isn't true patriotism about making sure our young people have a secure future with opportunities for skilled jobs? How else can the government assist? We can also look at business practices and how they affect small firms. It's possible for clothing manufacturers to survive if they do not have certainty about production, deliveries and payments. This can be about the lack of formal agreements with buyers, or that any agreements simply were not honoured. This puts manufacturers' cash flow in difficulties. Materials need to be bought, wages need to be paid. There can be an unfair transfer of risk from brand to manufacturer. Small enterprises can be mistreated by their more powerful business customers. That's why I support a fashion watchdog to protect small garment manufacturers, and I would welcome the Minister's assessment of this concept. On a similar theme, we need to ensure that there is a level playing field for UK manufacturers on ethical working practices, sustainability, transparency and compliance. We know that the Competition and Markets Authority has published guidance for fashion businesses making green claims about their garments. We need to ensure that the online giants comply with all of the regulations and are not undercutting UK enterprises with opaque information about how they source their products. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, technology and education. I'm pleased to welcome Professor Susan Postlethwaite from Manchester Metropolitan University, who I believe may be with us today, and her report, Reshoring UK Garment Manufacturing with Automation, makes the case for agile, small-scale, reshored garment manufacturing systems and a newly trained, highly skilled workforce. The report focuses on technology and education, the potential for new robotic and automated systems in UK fashion manufacturing, and redesigning fashion education to embrace this technology. How can the government help industry rise to the challenge and create high-quality jobs across our communities? Most of all, let's kick off the discussion with the industry and with the government working together so we can focus on what is important, making the UK the global home of sustainable fashion.
Well, I want to thank you on that point.
Of course.
Liam Connor.
And the importance of sustainability and the environmental impact of offshored fashion extend into the whole life cycle of our clothes. One of the first meetings I had upon being elected was with Chris Carey's Collections, a textile recycler in my constituency of Beckenham and Penge. And they told me how the wide-scale proliferation of cheap, imported, fast fashion products with low-quality fabrics was leading to huge declines in their recycling rates and leading them to condemn more and more clothes to landfill. Does my honourable friend agree that when evaluating onshoring feasibility, we should consider the whole life cycle of our clothes?
Catherine West.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and my honourable friend makes an excellent point. There's so much going on in our constituencies, but with relatively little support from local or central government, and now that could be with a small amount of effort, and in that sector of sustainable fashion, we could be helping the industry to really flourish. As I said, the sustainable fashion, home of sustainable fashion, delivering high-skilled jobs, creating a truly inclusive economy which works for everyone. So finally, for the Minister, can the government promote onshoring across the industry and promote the benefits of manufacturing in the UK? Can the government turbocharge public procurement of local suppliers and increase awareness right across the public sector? That procurement's no longer just about pound, shilling and pence, but about best value for communities. And what can the government do to provide support to small firms on capital expenditure for research, development and technology? Will he work with the industry to promote training and apprenticeships? And I know that he's a great supporter of that already, helping parents who want to return to the workforce as well as youngsters. Will he assess the merits of the fashion watchdog? And finally, UK manufacturers need a level playing field. Are the regulations and guidance about sourcing and transparency up to scratch, or is it time for a review? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Question is that this House has considered onshoring in the fashion and textiles industries, and I call Shaukat Adam.
Thank you. It's wonderful to see you in this place as well. And I'd really like to thank the Right Honourable Member for Hornsey and Friam Barnett, not just for securing this important debate, but how committed she was to travel all the way to Leicester in my hometown to show how committed and seriously she takes this matter. And Chair, if I may, I would like to discuss my hometown city and focus this speech on that, because we are a city, Leicester is a city rooted in textile heritage, from Tudor hosiery knitters working in their homes to the industrial expansion of the 19th century. In fact, Leicester once proudly claimed that it clothed the world. And by 1936, it was recognised as the second richest city in Europe. And in its height had over 1,500 factories employing tens of thousands of people. And Minister, as a young boy, this is not just nostalgia. I grew up in the shadows of these factories, and I saw firsthand how they powered enterprise, they created family wealth from people who just came to this country, and fostered a culture of community entrepreneurship and philanthropy as well. And these businesses did not just produce garments, they also sponsored local events, supported charities, built places of worship, and invested in the city. Manufacturing was in fact woven into the social fabric of Leicester, shaping not just livelihoods but also lives. Today, across the county, the garment sector still supports approximately 11,000 jobs. Every component needed to make a complete garment is still available within the city. Leicester offers true end-to-end production from design concept to finished product. They do this with speed, flexibility, and technical capability that many overseas supply chains simply cannot match. Yet garment manufacturing now accounts for just £375 million of the UK's textile sector's 25.6 billion industry. That's less than 2%. Meanwhile, tens of millions of our pounds in public procurement is leaving our shores, and we surely have to ask why. The economic case is simply really strong for onshoring. Let's just talk about the British Army clothing budget alone, which is nearly worth £80 million annually. In previous years, as already mentioned by the Right Honourable Member, figures are only available from 2013. only a small fraction, 6%, was manufactured in Britain. That's 94% being manufactured abroad, with an overwhelmingly abroad. NHS uniforms is another framework which is worth over £125 million over 5 years. But during COVID, the Department of Health and Social Care spent over £13 billion in PPE, with billions of it written off as unusable and millions more spent on storage. And we saw that during the pandemic that UK factories could pivot rapidly to produce PPE and scrub up at scale. The capacity exists, the skills exist, but what is missing is a clear mandate. Other nations understand this very clearly. In fact, in the United States, military uniform must be made domestically for national security reasons. The UK, I believe, should adopt a similar principle. Military uniforms and NHS clothing should be manufactured in Britain wherever possible. I'm not promoting protectionism, but for me this makes perfect economic and strategic sense. There's also an extremely strong environmental case for onshoring, because onshoring reduces naturally carbon miles and allows for tighter environmental oversight. Leicester's innovators such as Nanofic and Shibori dye houses, working alongside De Montfort universities, are pioneering wastewater treatment methods that demonstrates how environmental responsibility and industry can work hand in hand. And there's also a very powerful social case, Minister. Garment manufacturing provides flexible employment. This is particularly valuable for many, for all, but particularly for women, enabling many to rejoin the workforce after having children, combating isolation and providing financial independence. In fact, I recently met trainees at Fashion Enters Leicester's Hub alongside Jenny Holloway and saw firsthand the appetite for skilled, ethical production. There's community organisations who have joined me today, like Wesley Hall, and there's also the Sharma Women's Centre, offers sewing classes that serves as a pathway to work for many disadvantaged women. Leicester does not lack a workforce readiness, it has it in abundance. Now, I appreciate that the industry in my city has faced negative headlines. We can't shy away from that. And I agree wholeheartedly that any form of exploitative behaviour must be addressed and rooted out. However, the tacit review, launched after these serious allegations, found cases, yes, of some non-compliance, yet it made it perfectly clear that portrayal of an industry dominated by widespread modern slavery was just simply overstated. Enforcement bodies found no evidence of prosecutable modern-day slavery offences. The vast majority of Leicester factories are hard-working, skilled and ethical, and they certainly deserve recognition for this and not stigma. Furthermore, if we are serious about ethical supply chains, we must be also serious about ethical purchasing. That is why proposals for a garment trading adjudicator, a fashion watchdog model on the grocery code adjudicator, deserve serious consideration. Research recently presented at the Fair Work and Supply Chains in the UK garment industry event showed that the strain that purchases are being put under by brands. 100% of suppliers pay for audits, yet only 6% are guaranteed future orders. Lead times can drop at the drop of a hat, halving from 30 days to 14 days, and the payment terms are lengthened without warning. Orders are cancelled or altered mid-production. In fact, 67% of manufacturers are reporting that brands refuse to cover the cost of any of these changes. This volatility destabilizes factories and workers alike, and it simply isn't fair or sustainable. Leicester Made, through its Leicester Textile Renewable Project, is already bringing together expertise to strengthen UK supply chains, celebrating regional skills and accelerating sustainable, tech-driven onshore production. Fashion Enter is leading calls for public procurement reform, and these are not just abstract campaigns, these are practical, deliverable solutions. We must also target packaging waste, introduce penalties for firms that produce large volumes, which bring down unit costs, only for much of it to remain unsold for 12 months later. Changing what waste means may force retailers and brands to stop this volume production because the current carrots, Minister, are simply not working. And let's incentivise our manufacturers by creating tax breaks for companies that are creating clothing from waste and dead stock. The cost of dealing with fashion waste, especially through low-cost Chinese retailers like Shein, is rising exponentially. An incentive for UK manufacturers to create garments from dead stock helps tackle this issue and create a steady stream of businesses for UK companies. We need to create a uniform national body to advocate for the sector and a national director of manufacturers too. This would help join the dots to create competitive clusters. This is already happening in Sheffield and Manchester councils, which are developing local cluster productions and competitive local supply chains. And finally, we must also have awareness, Minister. We must fund a consumer awareness campaign. Multiple research products show that people will pay more to support local communities and businesses. Create a new Made in UK trademark that mandates that only businesses actually making clothes in the UK can use it. Currently, made in the UK doesn't mean made in the UK. It can be made somewhere else and packaged here and still count. So, Minister, onshore increases our economic prosperity, reduces carbon footprint, strengthens labour standards, enhances national security and restores community pride. Leicester and indeed other garment manufacturers do not need charity. It needs fair enforcement, responsible sourcing and government leadership in procurement. A modest increase raising the share of UK manufactured clothing sold domestically to just 10% would be transformational. It would create thousands of skilled jobs and rebuild capacity and create enormous revenue for the Treasury. Leicester once clothed the world. With the right policy direction, it can clothe Britain again ethically, sustainably and proudly. Thank you.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and a pleasure to follow the Honourable Gentleman for Leicester South. He and I share the same football team supporting. I'm afraid at this moment in time they're not doing that well, but we do hope for better things in the future. Can I thank the Honourable Lady for Hornsey and friend Barnett for setting the scene so well. The Honourable Lady in her her introduction referred to the many places in the United Kingdom where there's great. I'm going to refer to Northern Ireland, where the linen industry was one of our major producers, and something that we are very, very proud of. Now, Madam Chair, I can never be called a fashion icon. I might be a dedicated follower of fashion, but it doesn't make me a fashion icon by any means. I do, and I certainly can appreciate good craftsmanship. And this is something that has been the history and the legacy of Northern Ireland, with the linen industry being world famous. The quality or the legacy of quality linen work continues to this very day throughout Northern Ireland. I'm old enough, it would probably be no secret, but the oldest person in this room today, but I can go back far enough in my constituency of Strangford and Newton Arstown in particular, where we had absolutely somewhere between 15 and 20 factories producing textiles and fashion and linen and threads in my constituency. They're all away now. I think we've only one left. And it wasn't unusual for someone to leave a factory on a Friday night and start a new job in another factory on the Monday morning, because such was the opportunity that there was. But the world has changed, although I will refer to others in Northern Ireland who do incredibly important work. Whilst the fashion and the textile industry in Northern Ireland has shifted from mass production to a very specialised, a very high-end and a very innovative sector, focusing on luxury linen, on textile, technical textiles, advanced garment manufacturing. Remaining firms thrive through digital, sustainable and specialised technology. Leveraging, for example, William Clark & Sons' 300-year expertise. Key players like Ulster Carpets use robotics, while others support the niche market for luxury, including in apparel and home. I should have said, I'm very pleased to see the Minister in his place. As always, will not be disappointed with his answers and the requests we put forward. Expectations high. Also a pleasure to see the Shadow Minister in her place, and she's doing a double run today. She did the earlier debate and now she's doing this one as well. But well done to you. The industry is transformed from high volume production to be design driven, to be specialised manufacturing, and many of our specialised companies are renowned globally for their luxurious products, and we remain incredibly proud of this industry in Northern Ireland, because it does do all the things that we hoped it would. While the industry has contracted, and I've illustrated that in my own town, major town of Newton Ards, in the constituency of Strangford, there's many others. There's factories in Comber, in Ballynahinch, in Ballygowan, in Calency. They're all away, but it seems to have focused in mid-Ulster. it remains a notable part of the local economy. The sector accounts for still 2,000 firms in Northern Ireland, employs over 10,000 people, with employment heavily centred on textile manufacture. Over 40% of that workforce, clothing manufacture and the washing, dry cleaning service. Just an illustration how the sector has adjusted to the modern age and at the same time has been able to survive, maybe in a smaller way from the numbers of factories. From the Cuneen Group in County Tyrone to individual fashion houses, Northern Ireland continues to produce quality goods to a growing global reach. And I'm very thankful to those who promote the best of British brands globally. I will conclude with this, Madam Chair. I know the Minister will be very careful to ensure that every part of this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is included in British brand promotion. And I know that's the Minister's commitment, but I do look forward to this industry going from strength to strength. Thank you so much.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Ms Jardine. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. Nobody better to chair a debate on fashion, if I may say so. Can I firstly thank the member for Hornsey and Fry and Barnett for her excellent opening speech and for all the wonderful points she made. I just want to get slightly competitive for a moment. I admire her skirt that her sister made, but I actually want to draw attention to my top that I'm wearing. I made it myself. So onshoring fashion in action here. Actually, since the Minister intervenes from a sedentary position, it's a good opportunity to say that actually the hand knitting industry in this country supports many, many jobs in many rural areas right across the country, Northern Ireland, Scotland, Wales. But I must say, and having spoken to the people who own Knit With Me, which is the amazing knitting shop on Richmond Hill, of which I'm a very regular customer, they tell me how much harder it's become since Brexit to be sending some of their amazing products abroad because, of course, pure wool is an animal product and it falls under those regulations, and the customs now required to send packages abroad to the EU has become so much more challenging for them. So I'm here today as much to stand up for the hand knitting industry, literally standing in my hand knitted top. But that's not quite what this is about, so I beg your pardon. The Liberal Democrats recognise the urgency to transform the way that fashion operates. We must reduce pollution, curtail environmental damage and tackle unethical practices in the supply chain. The fast fashion industry has been linked to unethical labour practices and modern slavery, tarnishing the appeal of the garments people wear. We urgently need a more sustainable fashion industry, and increasing domestic production is an important aspect of that, as the member for Leicester South so passionately set out when talking about his own constituency. Onshoring is the process of bringing fashion and textile manufacturing back to the UK from overseas. It aims to shorten supply chains and rebuild domestic production capacity that has been lost through decades of offshoring. There are many benefits to onshoring production. It could create local jobs and support British manufacturers and suppliers. Bringing more production domestically would also strengthen the UK supply chain, reducing reliance on distant producers and the risk of global disruption. There are also benefits to brands seeking agile, flexible production, especially smaller and emerging labels that value local partners, not to mention the reduction of carbon emissions by minimising long-distance shipping, and fits with growing consumer demand for climate-friendly products and allowing better quality control and adherence to environmental and labour standards. Currently, less than 3% of clothing worn in the UK is made domestically, showing the scale of the decline. However, the UK fashion and textile sector retain a base of skilled mills, heritage factories and emerging micro-factories that could support scaled-up onshoring and as such has significant potential for domestic growth. UK labour, energy and running costs are, however, significantly higher than many overseas locations, making price competition difficult, and small businesses may struggle with the high initial investment required to rebuild facilities. Many of the challenges of growing the sector are compounded by a shortage of skilled workers such as sewing machinists. There's a risk of losing these kinds of specialist crafts if they're not actively rebuilt and supported. More broadly, access to training, hiring and retaining a skilled workforce are issues which affect businesses of all kinds across the country. The Liberal Democrats welcome the industrial strategy at the beginning of the Parliament and the commitment to an increase in skills and training. We would introduce a general duty of care for the environment and human rights in business operations and supply chains. We would introduce legislation obliging retailers to guarantee full traceability in their supply chains, ensuring ethically sourced materials, decent livelihoods, safe working conditions, as well as the introduction of joint liability for subcontractors in the fashion and fabric industry. The UK imports around £20 million worth of clothing from countries around the world every year, and around 25% of this is estimated to come from China. And Liberal Democrats believe that the Chinese government's actions in Xinjiang constitute a genocide. The National Crime Agency decided not to launch an investigation into the importation of cotton products manufactured by forced labour in the Xinjiang province of China, and the Court of Appeal found this to be unlawful. Liberal Democrats welcome this decision. All human beings should be treated with decency and have their human rights respected. With 19 billion units of clothing being produced in China yearly, it's not unbelievable that much of this is produced by detainees in Xinjiang. Happy to give way.
Madam Shawkett.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. Would she agree with me that any company that is found to utilise slave trade with cotton should not be allowed to list themselves on the stock market in this country?
I'm grateful to the honourable member for his intervention, and I think he's absolutely right. We need to take much firmer action to ensure that no part of the supply chain for any products that are traded in this country, or indeed, as he says, their stocks on the stock market, are produced by any kind of forced labour. It is an affront to human rights, but it is also, more pragmatically, if I may, obviously not a level playing field for producers who are using ethical, fairly treating their workers and using ethical processes in their production. The Global Legal Action Network, who brought this case forward, say there's an abundance of evidence that UK companies import cotton made with forced labour from China, that 85% of Chinese cotton is grown in the Xinjiang region. Slavery is not an issue of the past. Today, almost 50 million people are trapped in slavery worldwide. So we call on the government to reverse the Conservatives' rollbacks of modern slavery protections and introduce legislation obliging retailers to guarantee full traceability in their supply chains, ensuring ethically sourced materials, decent livelihoods and safe working conditions. We want to champion human rights and support survivors. The Liberal Democrats are calling for the government to issue a comprehensive China strategy, which places human rights and effective rules-based multilateralism at its centre. My colleagues and I will continue to stand up for people's human rights in the UK and across the globe, including in China, where much of the UK's fashion comes from. But in order to encourage onshoring, the UK government must do more to help UK business. They must champion start-ups and the UK's entrepreneurs. They must do more to help SMEs with business costs for things like energy and people, and they must upskill our workforce to be able to do the jobs created. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Opposition spokesperson Rebecca Paul.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Ms Jardine, again, twice in one afternoon, a treat for both of us. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Hornsey and Freen Barnett on securing today's debate, and I have listened with huge interest to the points which have been made. We are all no doubt proud of what Britain makes, and I certainly agree that we should do all we can to create the environment for businesses to flourish and produce more here. The harsh truth, however, is that production is often offshore due to the UK not being competitive on cost. With sky-high energy costs, labour costs, taxes and all the regulatory burden that comes with it too, we cannot be surprised to see many of our manufacturing businesses packing up and moving elsewhere. However, the good news is that we can still compete when it comes to quality and speed, with many businesses where cost isn't the driving motivation choosing to source from the UK, knitwear being a good example. Despite these challenges, the fashion and textile industry in the UK is significant and important. UK Fashion and Textile Association research commissioned from Oxford Economics found that the wider sector supported a 62 billion contribution to UK GDP, 1.3 million jobs and more than 23 billion in tax revenues. That same work underlined how geographically spread those jobs are, from London to the northwest, Yorkshire and the Humber, the southwest, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and how important the sector is for younger workers and women. Many different services and skills are needed to transform fabrics into finished garments. Designers, technicians, machinists, graders, pattern cutters, fabric technologists, dye houses, finishing plants, logistics and aftercare all play an essential role. I saw this firsthand when I worked for Jigsaw, the retailer, just before entering politics, who were also very much known for their knitwear. Seems to be a theme today. We aren't going to get to a point anytime soon where every button and every zip can be made in this country. And frankly, without a cheap energy plan, we won't even see garments made here either. Warm words aren't enough to bring about the change the Honourable Member is calling for. But businesses are now discovering that cheaper production from the other side of the world does have its downsides. Major retailers have described how customs-related supply chain frictions, increased admin costs and global events affecting major routes, including disruption around the Suez Canal, have impacted transit times and driven up costs across the industry. There is clearly appetite now to address these issues by producing closer to home, maybe even at home, so this does present an opportunity. There are also considerations around sustainability that can play to our advantage. The rapid rise of so-called fast fashion has pushed production far from the consumer, and it has often pushed environmental and social costs wholly out of sight. Now, though, we are in an era where customers, investors and regulators are far less willing to accept "we didn't know" as an excuse. They want to know their clothing has been produced ethically. Traceability is becoming a brand asset in and of itself. That is why UKFT points to the opportunity for technology such as QR codes, RFID or even AI-enabled systems to strengthen transparency and build consumer trust in made in the UK as a mark of ethical production. But if that is the opportunity, we also need to recognise the barriers to us benefiting from it. First, cost, which I've already mentioned a number of times, given its importance. UKFT's Reshoring for Real report captures a real appetite among brands to source more domestically, but only if the cost model makes sense and if standards can be trusted. It really isn't rocket science. If we want companies to onshore production, we need to make it cheaper for them to do so. The government's lack of action on bringing the cost of energy down, the imposition of the jobs tax, higher business rates, and the disastrous Employment Rights Act show they do not get it. Second, skills, which has already been mentioned a number of times. When a country loses capacity, it also risks losing the training pipeline. We can talk about onshoring, but if there are not enough skilled people to do the work, the opportunity will be taken elsewhere. That is why, in previous debates, members both here and in the other place have raised the need for stronger skills routes relevant to garment and textile manufacturing, and why engagement with industry on training and technical education undertaken by the previous government has mattered. Third, and I must admit I was shocked to learn that this is the case, and I hadn't expected that this was an issue, but past labour compliance issues in British factories have damaged trust to the point that some companies are now wary of or have concrete policies against UK sourcing until they are confident these issues are resolved. Such circumstances make further basing or investment into the UK a difficult proposition for reputation-conscious firms. This clearly needs to be addressed, but with a careful eye on not heaping even more regulatory burdens onto compliant, law-abiding businesses. Indeed, it was the previous Business and Trade Secretary, who has now gone on to greater things, who in 2023 set out that her department was engaging and promoting fashion and textile companies domestically and internationally, noting that fashion, footwear and textiles exports totaled £7.5 billion in 2022, and that government funding was supporting London Fashion Week through the British Fashion Council and supporting UKFT activity at key international trade shows. I hope that the current government will be as robust in their support. Such support matters because onshoring does not sit in a silo. A stronger domestic manufacturing base goes hand in hand with strong exports and with a globally respected brand, Britain. If you have a solid local supply chain, you attract design talent. If you attract design talent, you build brands. If you build brands, you export. If you export, you grow. I also want to pick up one point raised in the debate application which referenced UKFT estimates, suggesting that onshoring could unlock substantial additional growth, jobs and tax receipts. There is a real prize here, particularly in places where manufacturing capability already exists or could be rebuilt. For communities that have lived through the loss of industrial jobs, modern textile manufacturing, technical fabrics and high-value apparel production can be part of a new story, one that is compatible with innovation, automation and clean growth. But this can only happen if the right environment is created for these businesses. On behalf of His Majesty's opposition, I commit that we will continue to press for a serious pro-growth approach to business and trade that allows industries like fashion and textiles to flourish. I look forward to hearing from the Minister on the Government's approach. Thank you.
Minister Sir Chris Bryant.
Jardine, it's an enormous delight to see you in the chair. I can't imagine a greater delight this afternoon than seeing you in the chair. I want to warmly commend my honourable friend from Hornsey and Fran Barnett on bringing this debate and the passion with which I know she's approached this issue, not just today, but over many, many months and throughout her time as an MP. It's one of the things that I know that she's talked about. And since Burberry used to be based in my constituency and then left my constituency, I feel quite strongly about some of the issues that relate to this. So it's a delight that I'm standing in for my colleague in the department this afternoon. It's great to hear from the Honourable Gentleman from Leicester South. Of course, we all know of both the strengths that Leicester has had in relation to the garment industry over many, many years and decades, and in fact, across the whole of the Midlands, there have been many different parts of the garment industry, including different parts of the shoe industry, which have been intrinsic to its economic success over centuries. And of course, we've known some of the problems that there have been about working standards, labour standards as well. And he made a very strong argument for his constituency. Now, my honourable friend for Strangford, he said that he is a dedicated follower of fashion. Of course, referring back to the Kinks song from 1965, which I and he are old enough to remember. But, I mean, I just remember one of the lines. If he is I'm doing the polite line from the song. There are others which might not fit him so well. But one week he's in polka dots, the next week he's in stripes. But I think he's always pretty consistent in his attire. Smart and elegant and to the point, and he made a very strong set of points on behalf of his constituents. I agree with many of the points that were made by that have been made by the Liberal Democrats, and in particular, I'm very conscious of this issue around small packages. People trying to send from, in particular, artisanal businesses, small businesses up and down the land. Sometimes these are hobby businesses as well, but sometimes they're more substantial, trying to sell packages into Europe and finding it really difficult to do so. It's one of the reasons we need to get to the frictionless trade, not the fictional frictionless trade that was promised by some people in another political party when they were in government. And that's what we're seeking to do as much as we possibly can. And I'm very focused on how we can enable the whole value chain in the UK to discover ways of exporting both into the European Union, which still represents something like 45% of our export opportunities, and wider around the world as well. One of the things we know is that if a UK business is able to find a second market, is able to export, it's more likely to pay its staff better, it's likely to be more resilient, it's likely to grow faster, and it's likely still to be there in 10, 15 and 20 years' time. So for all those reasons, we want to do everything we possibly can to enable more of that whole sector to export. And she referred to responsible business conduct, which I'll come on to a little bit later, and as I will come on to some of the comments that were made by the Honourable Member for Reigate, who has a slightly fanciful memory of what the previous government was like, in my humble opinion. And I think if we had a vote, we'd win as well. So I think it'd be all to one, but there we are. Look, the truth, I think we all know that fashion is about as British as tea and crumpets. There's so many massive household names. Ted Baker, Paul Smith, Superdry. I never knew Superdry was British. Superdry. Barber, Assos, Alexander McQueen, Stella McCartney, All Saints, Dunhill, admittedly owned by a Swiss company at the moment, but nonetheless very much a British brand. Richard James, and I'm just talking about the clothes I'm wearing today. For that matter, it's exactly the same. I'm not wearing all of those, obviously. It's similar with shoes. I used to be the youth officer for the Diocese of Peterborough, living in Northampton, and I know in Northamptonshire, as well as in neighbouring counties, shoe manufacture has just been so much part of its whole history. So whether it's Doc Martens, June, I never know how you say whether it's Cheney or Cheney, Trickers, Joseph Azaguri, Yule, Churches, Clarks, Grenson, Loke, John Lobb, Crockett and Jones, Geoffrey West. I mean, these boots were made for walking. And that's just what they're going to do, because whenever you go anywhere in the world, you see so many British shoe brands in every major high street in the world, and in airports and all the rest of it. And we are immensely proud of that. And quite a lot of that is, not all of it, but quite a lot of that is made in the UK. And then, of course, it's easy to talk about these big brands, but precisely, I think part of this debate is to try and say that there are lots of smaller brands which are making their way, which we as a government need to do everything we possibly can to help. One of my favourites, I've referred to them before in the House, is Howie's, originally based in London, ethically based. They're now in Cardigan in Wales. Produce a whole range of different, in particular sporting clothing and other things. Original fibres too, London brand, ethically sourced, trying to bring forward the best in British styling as well as manufacture. There's Shrimps, there's Saint and Sophia, there's Talia Bayer, there's Peachy Den, there's Black and Beach, and one particularly perhaps for the member for Strangford, Sleazy Rider. There's, I think he's saying no to that. You don't know what they're like. He doesn't know what they're like, Chair. And then in Edinburgh, of course, there's lots of other brands as well. Perhaps the most famous, I guess, would be Pringle. We've been talking a little bit about some of the knitwear in the UK, but there's Beira and Rowan Joy and Kerry Mackenzie, some of these smaller brands that we really want to prosper, because so many of them know that part of their key selling point is that they are British, that they bring something special to the market, they've got a particular eye, they're sourcing materials in an ethical way, and the whole of their, it just gives you a buzz to be wearing some of their clothes. And that's precisely the kind of industry that we want to support. And I when I was the Shadow Minister for Culture, one of my best days was going to down to see the Royal School of Needlework. Now, you may think of this as a rather posh thing that is just going to be putting together things for royal coronations and things like that, but actually, it's the only place in Europe where you can gain a qualification in needlework, which is so essential to some of the sort of higher fashion brands in the UK. And I was absolutely delighted that when I walked in there, I thought I was going to meet lots of very posh people from Reigate or wherever it may be, and actually the first two young women I met were both from the Rhondda. And they wanted to go into the fashion industry, and they knew that by acquiring all the skills that they could from the Royal College of Needlework, they were really going to flourish. Of course, the sector is worth bazillions. That's an official term. The statistics people in the department will probably want me to correct the record on that later. But £62 billion worth to the UK economy, this sector. It supports 1.3 million jobs and £23 billion in tax revenue every year. Major manufacturing hubs in lots of different parts of the land, as has just been referred to by the Honourable Lady for Reigate. So, for instance, Leicester, we've already heard, the whole of the Midlands, the Highlands, Harris Tweed, of course, we've not referred to. I've got a very splendid waistcoat from Harris Tweed. I've not mentioned Favorbrook either, another great British brand. It's not just about textiles for clothing. It's also has been referred to for camouflage, but also high-tech and new developments in the sector are really important. I was meeting yesterday with Panaz Limited from Burnley, and they produce a whole series of fabrics, very much at the cutting edge. Sorry, that sounds wrong, because that's a metaphor, isn't it, from the textile industry, but at the cutting edge of innovation in the sector. So for antimicrobial and fire retardant textiles, and they are selling across the world, which is brilliant. There are, of course, connections between this sector and lots of other sectors which we are particularly good at, which is why they are integral, I would argue, to our industrial strategy. So you've only got to watch 10 minutes of Bridgerton to know that fashion and textiles are a really important part of what we're selling for the whole world. You could say the same about Bond, though I would prefer it if Bond, even though Bond is now owned by Amazon, if Bond wore British tailoring. And incidentally, just one point about how British tailoring is. The biggest supermarket in Spain is called El Corte Inglés, which means the English cut. And that's because it was founded in something like in 1890 because tailors in Madrid knew that the best tailoring in the world was British, and they wanted to sell on the basis of that. It was bought up in 1934 and became this enormous chain in Spain. But it just shows that connection. And one final connection I would make is with British jewellery. So we have some of the best jewellers in the world, and often that connection between fashion and jewellery is a really important part of the kind of things that we excel at. Now, some of the specific points that was made, first of all, about procurement. I think it's I hadn't heard this point about uniforms before. It's a really good one, and I'm going to chase this one down. I will undertake. She doesn't have to go and beat up all the, metaphorically, the ministers in the MOD. I will do that for her. And I'll get all the details. I mean, it would be good if more of our British services were dressed in British uniforms. I remember once being in Sarajevo and being introduced to the new Italian uniforms, which I think had been done by Dolce & Gabbana. Previously, they'd been Armani, but they thought they'd upgraded to Dolce & Gabbana. Or it may have been the other way around, I'm not sure. I might have to correct the record again. But she makes a point about the Procurement Act 2023. This does enable, of course, public bodies. It gives them greater ability to prioritise ethical and local sourcing. And you would think that that would apply to the whole of government rather than just parts of government. So let's see if we can make that happen. She asked about government investment. Of course, we have set aside £4.3 billion to support manufacturers over the next 5 years, and up to £2.8 billion of that is for research and development. And there is, I would argue that quite often the creative industries, such as fashion, are hesitant about seeking research and development money because they sort of think that there's nothing new under the skies, and therefore they wouldn't qualify as research and development. But you've only got to watch Kinky Boots to know research and development is just as essential in fashion as it is in any other sector as well. We have revamped our support for businesses to make it more effective, and that's the business growth service which we've developed. And I would urge any business to seek help and advice when they need it. We're very keen on enhancing the trade promotion work that we do. London Fashion Week is coming up, the spring version, which unfortunately at the moment is just for women. I would like us to get back to male and female in spring, though the economics of that don't necessarily add up at the moment. But we're certainly very supportive of London Fashion Week in the autumn. In particular, I think members may know, but of all the big fashion weeks around the world, the UK has the kind of goes for the kind of edgier part of the market, and I think that is precisely where we should be, which is why it's so important that we provide financial support for what we call New Gen, which has produced a whole suite of new designers over recent years, many of whom are now breaking into much bigger markets. And of course, we continue our support through the British Fashion Council. We also produced a small business strategy last year, which is really important, not only because many of these businesses suffer from late payments. One of the things we definitely need to work on far more effectively than we have in the past. Shortness of, and then a second element of that is lack of availability for cash, whether that's for significant investment or it's for export investment. And in both of those fields, we have set aside additional financial support to make sure that that is available for small and medium-sized enterprises. And then if I just come to the issue of responsible business conduct, several honourable members have referred to the issues of forced labour, of sustainability. We've not talked about palm oil or deforestation or cotton, the production of cotton in different parts of the world and so on. Members will know that we've been engaged in a responsible business conduct review, which is very nearing completion. And I hope that we'll be able to announce what our conclusions are from that very soon. If I might just say, my aim in that is not to load businesses with more regulation, but to try and make sure that the regulation that they are subject to is truly effective. Because one of my anxieties is that sometimes we just get businesses to produce reports So somebody's employed to produce lots and lots of reports which get bunged in the annual report, and nobody in the world reads them ever. That is, I will in one moment, and I just don't think that that is effective as trying to make as other measures that we might be able to introduce, which would be more so. So we're trying to curtail the regulatory burden, whilst at the same time trying to make it more effective. I will give way what I was about to finish.
That point, would the Minister agree with me that effective regulation in this area is not about putting burdens on business, but ensuring a level playing field so that ethical businesses and those that are committed to the welfare of their employees and sourcing good quality materials can have a level playing field to sell their products, and that they're not being undercut by people who don't observe those standards?
Mr. Brown.
No, I completely agree with that. But there's another point I would make, which is that, of course, as we put together our trade strategy, we always have to consider around the world whether there might be unfair subsidy, which is making it making it impossible for British businesses to be able to compete in the market, dumping and other unfair trade practices around the world. That's part of one of the set of issues that I want to be able to take to the World Trade Organization to be able to consider properly. I'm just going to end, if that's all right, with a couple of thoughts. The fast fashion industry, of course, we've all loved it. Shopping is a pastime for many. And for many, the availability of cheap clothing is an absolutely essential part of being able to dress themselves, because otherwise, at a time of global crisis and financial difficulties for very many families, where parents might be worrying about whether they're going to be able to pay the next bill that comes through the door, being able to make sure that the clothes that they buy for their kids to go to school and so on is affordable. All of that is I get all of that. But I do rejoice in my heart when I talk to younger generations of people, including my nieces, and who are as much in love with pre-loved clothes as they are with stuff that they might buy new today, with discovering something that's been around for a very long time, and not just buying something and chucking it out 2 months later. And I think there's a joy for all of us if we can, and an economic opportunity for all of us if we can manage to onshore more in a variety of different ways, partly by enabling people to recycle their own clothes a bit more often, recycle the clothes of others, and also being able to invest in ethical brands that really do the business in this country. That, of course, means that we have to invest in the skills so that there are people to be able to develop these things. I think the Honourable Lady is offering to provide knitting classes for all of her constituents. And incidentally, I should say I do love the Sewing Bee, which is a great television programme, which also makes the point, I think, for lots and lots of people that either you can make your own clothes, or for that matter, making sure that ethical and sustainable products are a really important part of making sure that we live in a world that we all want to pass on to our children, our grandchildren, or nieces and nephews. Thank you.
Catherine West, you have up to 2 minutes to wind up.
Thank you very much, Ms Jardine. And I'd like to thank the Backbench Committee again for the opportunity to promote sustainable fashion in the UK and ask the Minister some questions. I enjoyed hearing about the Leicester picture and my visit to Leicester. I enjoyed hearing about the recycling operations in Beckenham and Penge and the luxury linen production in Northern Ireland. And of course, we heard about the human rights considerations. And the point to make really is that some of our really good retailers are complying with the guidelines from the government and others aren't. And I think that's what's meant by trying to level things a little bit so that not all of the cost goes on to our really good retailers, but that in the shop it's a bit more seamless. I'd also, so to speak, I'd also like to thank the Minister with his usual flair to talk about the importance of frictionless trade with the EU and how he's straining at every sinew to achieve that. The importance of research and development cash for funding. Thanking him for his approach to the MOD on uniforms. He'll get his officials to do some digging for me on that. Or prison uniforms in general, where they're necessary. And of course, the late payment strategy is so important for small business, and cash availability for trade abroad for SMEs, another vital element of the trade strategy. We look forward very much to the Responsible Business Review, and hopefully we'll be at the launch whenever it is. We'll come and applaud. And also I wanted to thank Fashion Roundtable, Fashion Enter, and Baroness Lola Young for all that they do to promote the understanding and up-to-date information of all that's happening in the UK on sustainable fashion, so we can be really accurate in our debates. Thank you, Ms Jardine.
The question is that this House has considered onshoring in the fashion and textiles industry. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned. And can I just say